Hello, Principal Matters podcast listeners. I am Dr. Jen Schwanke, and I'm with William Parker again, and we are going to do one of our quick Q&As to open this episode. And Will, you have an awesome guest on today. Tell us who it
Oh my
is,
gosh.
and
Yes.
yeah,
You guys are going to get to hear Mark Shellinger, who is a good friend of mine and a mentor for so many people around time management for principals. So stay tuned because as soon as Jen and I finish this Q&A, we're going to jump into the wonderful conversation with Mark. Probably, in my opinion, one of the best people who've taught me about time management when it comes to school leadership. But Jen, here's the question that someone had sent us, which is how do you drill down into the buckets of key responsibility areas when it comes to individual involvement with your teams? And I'll give you an example. I had done a presentation where I talked about helping your team members identify what are the key things that they're responsible for so that you can help define on the front end of a year what someone's roles and responsibilities are instead of correcting performance that was never defined. And the example that this question follows up with is how can testing be led by one person but also be a team effort? So I know that question can go a lot of ways, and we've only got a few minutes here. But what are some thoughts you have when it comes to drilling down into helping people know what their responsibilities can be within a team?
right. I
Um,
think I think this. I'm so glad that we have this as a question because I think it's always about communication. And whenever I think of a big job that needs done, a responsibility that needs to be assigned, I think it's important to get everyone together, and this could be on a Zoom or in person or documented on a shared document or whatever. And then the assignment or the volunteering of responsibility should be clearly articulated. So let's just go with your example for testing. So you might have one person in charge of it, and that person might say, I'm going to need someone to receive and sign off on the test. I'm going to need 15 proctors. I'm going to need this many trainers. I'm going to need someone to check that everyone has a calculator, whatever it is. Those key responsibilities should be outlined and then a name assigned to them. And then I always, always, always say follow up with a written documentation. So it
mm.
might be, thanks so much for attending today's meeting. Here are just some bullet points on what everyone has agreed to do. Let me know if I've missed anything. So everyone knows, this is the part that I'm carrying for the person in charge.
Well, and what I love about the documentation piece, Jen, is it covers you in so many directions. And because most of our audience, our adult listeners, will just say it covers your ass in so many different
Right.
directions. Because on one, it helps re to emphasize the things that were communicated in this meeting or this commitment. Two, it's a way for you to follow up later to remember yourself what were the things that we committed to. And then three, it adds a level of accountability. But I've discovered that for there's just, and you know this, so many times you are helping, if you're, especially if you're helping assign other people responsibilities to lead, you might do that 3 or 4 or 5 times in a day. You might do that 3 or 4 times in a week. And so if you're not putting that in some written form, then there's really no way to be able to track and remember that accountability later.
Here's a trick too that I discovered probably around 4 or 5 years ago. On my calendar is bananas, like any school leader, but I will add something and I title it actions,
Mm.
and it will say follow up with Nikki on the communication to Nate. Follow up with Sam about the parent phone call. So I put on my calendar things that I just want to make sure happened, and that's easy on a calendar invite to just copy and paste the content from that documentation we just talked about. So you yourself get the reminders of the jobs that people are supposed to complete, and you can just kind of recalibrate yourself too. And it's on your calendar, so you naturally open it up and look at it.
Well, Principal Matters listeners, if you want to see some samples of some of the key responsibility area lists that I've created with staff in the past, reach out at will@williamdparker.com and I can just send you a link to some examples because these are things, Jen, that I've placed together when I was a principal for myself, but also for my admin team members, our counselors, and I would help create KRAs for them, office staff. So it is there's not just one way to do this, but whenever you're trying to figure out how to help manage the responsibilities of others. This is just one way, just like your action follow-up list is one way. So figure out what works for you. Think about the examples that Jen and I gave, and then figure out what's going to be that process that's actually most meaningful for your leadership and for the people that you're serving. So Jen, thanks for helping answer that question. And Principal Matters listeners, thank you for listening. And I know you're going to love this week's conversation because it's going to talk about time management and how to, as Mark Shellinger will explain, how to train people to treat you like you want to be treated. So Jen, we'll talk to you again soon. And Principal Matters listeners, we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Principal Matters Podcast, episode 414. Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, where each week we bring you inspiring, innovative, and imaginative ideas for your own school leadership. This week, I'm talking to my special guest, Mark Shellinger, about time management for principals. Mark Shellinger created the SAM process in 2005 with help from his wife, Carol, a network of colleagues across the U.S., and the Wallace Foundation. Mark was a teacher for 7 years, a principal for 10, and a superintendent for 10 more. External research confirms that SAM principals spend more time on instructional work, are happier, work a shorter day, and are better liked by their staff and see improved learning results. 1,200 plus school leaders in 22 states do this reflective practice change process every day. Mark and Carol grew up in Alaska and return to their summer home in Fairbanks every June. They have one daughter, Jessica, who teaches in Las Vegas, a granddaughter, Aurora, and a son-in-law, Gino. Mark Shellinger, welcome to Principal Matters Podcast. Why don't you fill in the gaps on that intro and tell the listeners something else they may be surprised to know about you?
Well, thanks, Will. It's good to see you and talk with you. I'm always hesitant when people say SAM is designed to improve someone's time, because I actually think principals use their time really well already. In fact, I'm pretty amazed that principals today came back to school after working yesterday. Their job is just so remarkably complex, and it's a job you can never finish. It's not like working in other areas. There's always more you could, should, would like to be able to do. And so I always tell principals, this is something you do to get to do the stuff you wanted to do when you said you wanted to be a principal. And so the SAM process is time management, but calling it that is kind of like calling your car an entertainment center. Your car does have an entertainment center, but that's not its purpose. SAM's the purpose is to help a principal be able to manage their management so they can do the instructional work they set out to do when they first said they wanted to be a principal. Mm-hmm. I don't know a principal who said, I want to be a principal to do discipline. I want to be a principal to do payroll. Instead, they said, I want to be a principal because I want to create the same culture in a school that I thought I was able to do in a classroom. But the culture in most schools says, no, that's not what we think a principal is. So in the SAM process, a principal is truly thinking, can I change that culture? Do I have the ability? Can I do that? And the good news for principals is if you do the SAM process, you will change how you use your time and people will see you differently. But it's a daily professional development thing you have to commit to.
Well, I am so excited to introduce you, Mark, to the Principal Matters audience. And let me just set some context. We've known each other for a long time. You were one of the very first leaders that reached out to me when I wrote my first book, Principal Matters, and to engage conversations with me. You shared the same process with me and other leaders at the district where I worked. You invited me to be a part of some of the conferences that you were doing with SAM's principals, and I've been a fan ever since. And I think I've told you this before, but I want to tell you again here that every year when I'm doing my own principal leadership development and we get into conversations about time management, I will tell them about Mark Shellinger and I'll tell them about the SAM process because it works, Mark, when you focus in on, and I love how you said that, managing. You said the purpose is to manage your management. So I want to give the Principal Matters listeners an opportunity to understand how that works. But before I ask the how it works question, take us back to what motivated you to get involved in this process? Because this is something you've worked on for a long time, but what was the origin story that led you into this work?
Guilt. That's it. I mean, as a principal, our school won 3 national awards in 10 years. Was it a good school? Yes. But did I ever spend the majority of my years doing instructional work, things that were with intention to improve teacher practice? No, I didn't. And then I became a superintendent. And what did I say to my principals? You should be focused on instructional leadership. But I didn't know how to have that happen. And so I felt guilty, to be honest with you. And my 10th year of being a superintendent, I had the opportunity through the Wallace Foundation to see if I could figure out a way to change the culture in a school in a reflective process manner so a principal could really do the things he or she really wanted to do. And would that have an impact on student performance? And of course it does. We know that the principal is the key factor. If you can get the principal to spend the majority of their day doing instructional work by definition that has intentionality to improve adult practice. And we know well why people don't want to do that. Adults are harder to work with. It's a lot more fun as a principal to work with kids. But we say to a SAM principal, you're not going to quit working with kids, but you're always going to do it through the lens of what does my work with kids, how does that inform what I need to do with teachers? Because unless you are engaged in helping a teacher, not by evaluating, but by coaching, assisting the teacher to be thoughtful and reflective about how they can be their better selves, you're never going to change your own condition. And so frankly, when you ask, how did it start? It was guilt. When I had the opportunity to explore it, I said yes, because I'm a very curious person. Curiosity to me is what makes life fun. And it was such an interesting idea to me to say, could you really change this so a principal could do the kinds of things he or she would like to be able to do that would benefit students in the end? But really the work you're doing is with the adults. And it worked. So it was kind of fun. That's how.
So explain to us what you discovered when you researched time management for principals. What were some of the data that stands out to you where our principals spend the majority of their time versus where they can be spending their time?
Well, first, time management is such a fraught topic because it makes people also kind of feel guilty. I should manage my time better. Principals aren't wasting their time, whether they do the SAM process or not. There's always so much you can, should, and would like to do. And so I want to preface anything I say with that. But here's what we know about principals. We know the average principal, according to a Learning Forward study, spends about 13% of their time doing instructional work the way I've defined it. We have different data that actually is a little bit more positive because we shadowed over 5,000 principals taking data every 5 minutes for their entire workday for 5 days. And we know the average principal in the US, based on that data, it's more like about 22%. And so when you look at that, 22% is like 1 day then out of a 5-day week, you're doing instructional work. And we know about learning that a person, if they're going to learn something, has to have frequent interaction. Not just a 1-day interaction, it needs to be frequent, and it has to be thoughtful, and it has to be reflective. And so when we look at principals, we know there's the starting point, about 20%. We know with principals that if the principal will schedule their work ahead of time, both their management and their instructional, they will see an increase in the time they spend and the things they want to spend. If they do that one thing, that sounds simple, doesn't it? It's kind of hard because you're asking the principal to go back and do lesson plans, essentially. Remember when we were teachers and we did lesson plans and then we became principals and we said, oh, we don't do that anymore. Why? Doesn't it make sense that if you scheduled your work, it'd be more likely you'll do more of it? But if you stop there, you're not going to get the kind of gain you want. If you just say, well, I scheduled my work and, yeah, I'm spending more time, you're not going to get there because for SAM to work, the principal has to do 2 more things. First thing they have to do is begin training people to use them the way they would like to be used. And I want to come back to that because that's where you get into first responders. And the other thing they have to do is they need to sit down with a reflective practice partner, somebody they trust, someone who is trained by us or someone else to irritate the principal just a little bit every day to get the principal to think about what could I do? What should I do? Never tell the principal what to do. Make them, kind of like the princess and the pea, that story. They kept putting a mattress and a mattress and a mattress so the princess would sleep better. We want the principal to be the princess, and we want the P to be that reflection. We want the principal at the end of the day to say, I made a decision not to go in and work with students in a classroom while I watched the teacher teach. That's what I was scheduled to do. But instead, I walked around the building for 2 hours looking at sprinklers with a fire marshal. Why did I make that choice? Was there someone else I could have trained to do that? Do I think that that was more important than being with the classroom teacher? Because my actions said it was. And so getting the principal to be reflective is really important. And that's what happens in the SAM daily meeting. And that's when they begin using their data. You want me to talk about the idea of reflection first? Or do you want me to talk about building a first responder structure and training people to use you the way they'd like?
Let's talk about that reflective piece first, and then we'll follow up with the training the people part. And I want to tell a quick anecdote, Mark, because I have a good friend who was a guest on this show. He was the Missouri State Principal of the Year last year, and he has told me how much he admires your process. And I love it that you said that your reflective practice partner should be someone you give permission to irritate you, because my friend John Boyd has told me it's that his administrative assistant has permission to sit down with him on a regular basis, almost daily, and ask him to reflect with her what was on his schedule and why he did not do it. And he has told me how effective that practice has been. I know that's just one of many other stories you're aware of like that. So talk to us about why that's such an important part of what you do in this process.
Well, there's a couple of reasons I think it's pretty critical. It first removes the assumption the principal makes that because I did a walkthrough or I was in a classroom, I somehow made instruction better. The SAM's job, the person who's going to irritate the principal just a little bit, it might be the secretary, it might be an instructional coach, might be a custodian, might be an assistant principal. They're trained in a reflective practice process to ask questions, get the person to be more thoughtful. And so the first piece of that is connectivity. We fool ourselves if we think we're in a classroom, that makes us an instructional leader. There's no evidence that being in classrooms makes the teaching better. What does make the teaching better is a series of interactions connected. So it's sort of like a train. So the SAM is going to say to the principal, great, you were in that classroom. What next? Well, what do you mean, what next? Well, what are you going to do with the fact that you were in that classroom? What can I schedule for you? You want to have a feedback conversation with the teacher. Do you want to connect it with the PD that you did last week? Connectivity becomes the train that moves the teacher's practice forward, getting the principal to throw out the notion that simply being in a classroom makes a difference. And instead, it becomes a so what next is really a critical piece. And so that reflection piece in the SAM daily meeting, there are 7 elements to the SAM daily meeting, and we're happy to share it with anybody who wants it. You don't have to pay for SAM services to see this stuff. We have it available on our website. But there are 7 elements in the SAM daily meeting. And the first piece of the reflection is simply, did you do what you had planned to do? If not, why? If you did, what next? So you create that connectivity. The second piece of the SAM daily meeting is then to pull up data of your work with people that you really want to improve. And so let's say a principal said, I really want to improve Mark, a 5th grade teacher. The SAM would say, here's the time you've spent with Mark so far this year. And the chart breaks it out in 15 different kinds of interactions the principal could have had, how much time they spent there, and the frequency. So you can see on a chart or a graph how frequent that was and how they connect or don't connect. And then the SAM asks the $1,000,000 question. Is Mark better today because you invested the 62 hours of time with him since September? Is he better? And if the principal says, no, he's not, I need to get rid of Mark. The SAM says, but you have him all year and the kids do. What are you going to do to help Mark now? Well, I don't know what to do. The SAM then is taught to say, well, who could you ask? I had one SAM in Atlanta, Georgia. The principal said, Well, I don't know. I guess I could ask Mark. And the Sam said, what a great idea. Let's have Mark come in and you ask him what would help. Do you know that Sam then, because of that interaction, one, helped her principal because the principal got off the dime and actually moved in a positive way to help Mark do better. But here's the other thing. Do you know that story now is used by over 1,200 principals around the country? And they do that very same thing. When they get lost and they say, I don't know what to do to help this person, they bring the person in and say, tell me how I can help you. What am I doing that's getting in the way? If I were the perfect principal, how would this data look different? Isn't that an amazing way when you get to work with another adult to say to the other adult, tell me? And what's kind of interesting about this, Will, isn't that what a good teacher does? Doesn't a good teacher in a classroom, if they're on their last nerve and they don't know how to help the person go forward, say to the kid, help me help you. What can I do to help? Being a SAM principal requires you to be very brave, and you have to be willing to hear stuff you don't want to hear. And I think that's one of the reasons it's so effective in culture change, because the whole idea here is, can you change the culture in a school where that's received well? I had one SAM principal in a large, it was New York actually, said, I'm going to be a good principal. I'm going to go in and do walkthroughs. And the SAM called me about 3 weeks later and said, he's doing lots of walkthroughs, Mark. I said, great, I'm really glad to hear that. But he won't do anything else. And I said, what do you want to ask him? Well, I want to ask him what he thinks happens when he leaves the room. Because I asked him, why is this making a difference? And he says, my mere presence in the room makes teaching better. The teacher stands up, moves around the room, isn't sitting behind her desk. But what I'd like to ask, the Sam said, is what does he think happens after? And she said, would you ask him, Mark? And I said, no, that's your job. Remember when he gave you permission? About a week later, she called me back and said, I asked him. And you know what he said? I don't know what happens. And I was ready for him, Mark. I said, I've already set up a meeting for you with 5 high school seniors. You're going to have lunch with them tomorrow. Ask them. So we did. And the kids said, oh, we love it when you're in our classroom. It's great. And the principal said, what happens when I leave? Well, the teacher's kind of in a bad mood and she's not too happy. You know what he did? He went to his staff meeting and he said the next day, what's wrong with me that the culture in that school looks at our work that way? What do I need to do to change? But isn't that an amazing thing in any relationship? If instead of thinking the other person has to change, if the person can say, what can I do to make this better? That's why it works. So yeah, the reflective piece is critical for SAMs.
I love that so much.
SAM to be able to ask reflective questions is something our coaches work on very diligently. When we work with a school, we do implementation that's pretty involved, but then we have a coach that works more with the SAM than with the principal to make sure that truly is a PLC when you think about it. When they have their SAM daily meeting every day, it's a professional learning community of 2 people, sometimes 3 or 4, sometimes there's more than one SAM, where you're talking together about what you can do to be better, not necessarily what somebody else can do.
Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. Why is IXL used in 95 of the top 100 U.S. school districts? Because it works. IXL is research proven to benefit all student populations, including English language learners and special education classrooms. IXL is an all-inclusive online learning and teaching solution for K-12 that accelerates achievement, saves teachers time, and more. This one platform helps you accomplish what normally would require dozens of other tools. For example, as students practice skills, IXL automatically differentiates learning to help them master concepts at their own pace. Teachers get real-time insights into how students are performing so they can provide timely support. What I personally love about IXL are the personalized SAT and ACT study plans. Students just need to enter their most recent test score, and IXL automatically generates a custom list of skills they should work on to improve their scores. Discover what IXL can do for your school. Visit IXL.com/PM today. So let me pause there for a moment because you have said so many incredible things, Mark. in that reflective relationship, some of the questions you said are important to ask, or that person to be asking the principal is, did you do it? What's next? What does the data show you about this person with whom you said you would be doing work? Is he or she better because of the time you've just spent doing that? And what will you do now to help him or her? And I love how you brought that full circle to sometimes the best thing you can do at that point is to ask that person directly, what can I do to be helping you get better? And you and I both know this, Mark, that that entire reflective cycle that you just described is exactly what you see highly effective teachers doing in classroom instruction. All you're doing is asking principals to place themselves back into that reflective cycle that good instruction embodies, and to be practicing that in the way that they're leading as instructional leaders. So on the one hand, it's not rocket science, but then on the other hand, you have a lot of data to show that this works. And so I want you to be able to take a moment and step into the piece about training people how you want to be trained. But look, I know you probably want to add some thoughts to what I just said before you do.
Well, you and I agree it is analogous to good teaching. But I also agree it's not rocket science. It's harder than rocket science. Mm-hmm. When Elon Musk gets one of his rockets to go into orbit, all he has to do is make it work once, and then he just follows the same recipe. With people, you could have a principal have something work once with a teacher, and it might not work with the same teacher the next day. And it may never work with a different teacher. The principal, an adult who's going to work with other adults to improve their practice, has all these difficulties because you're dealing with older people, and the older we are, it's the harder it is to learn something new. And part of that's biological. We're hardwired to learn things when we're young, and we can still learn when we're older. It just takes us more time. The other piece is ego. The kindergartner isn't bothered that they don't know Apple says ah. The kindergarten teacher is highly agitated if the principal wants to talk with the teacher about how Apple says ah and how you teach that, because ego gets in the way. So the principal's job is remarkably difficult and complex, but it can happen. But you have to be willing to take a risk. I had one principal, in fact, this is pretty common, when we do the initial implementation, and people then set their initial goals and they set up their time track, we ask them to identify 3 specific descriptors, instructional things that they would like to do more of. And almost everybody, for one of the 3 they picks celebratory feedback, celebrating other adults. It's the hardest kind of feedback. It is by far the hardest kind because it has to be specific. It has to be interactive. It's not just, you're such a good teacher. Sounds like you're talking to a dog. Instead, it has to be specific and get the other person to talk about it. And I'll tell you a funny story. We had a principal in Los Angeles who tried to do celebratory feedback, and the teacher turned to him as he was doing it. Because when we teach celebratory feedback, we say you can't talk about anything else. You can't say, here's something I liked, something I didn't, because that's just, not very transparent. And people don't believe the celebratory then. And so he goes in and he tries to do celebratory feedback. And this teacher looks at him and says, what's the real reason you're here? Do I need my union rep? And here's his brilliant answer. We also use this in training. No, I'm just trying to be a better principal. I think your job is really hard, and I don't think I focus very well on that. Help me get better. I want to be able to just say, I like this, and get you to talk about it. She told me that particular teacher, when I got to meet her about a year later, said it was when she changed her opinion of her principal, when he said, I'm trying to get better, help me. I love this stuff.
Oh my gosh, Mark, you're reminding me of so many other conversations I've had too. And I just have to pause for a second because it is still astounding to me how often I've had a similar conversation with other leaders who choose celebratory feedback. The surprise sometimes they get from staff members. So I can remember particularly in my younger years as an admin, when I first stepped in as an assistant principal, I began to try that practice of giving celebratory feedback. And I had a teacher stop by my office at the end of the day, and she said, Will, I just have to tell you, I've been in this teaching role for 20 plus years, and that's the first time an administrator's ever given me that kind of positive feedback. Thank you. And I was floored how could you be in this profession this long? And but then I've heard that story told other times, other places, Mark. And so you're right. I've never thought about it in the sense that one of the reasons we don't do it is because it is hard to be that specific, to be that targeted. But man, it's important. And so I'm so glad you said that.
Well, Will, and we've taught teachers for years not to believe us. When I went to principal school, I was told if you're going to tell a teacher something they might not want to hear, you might want to be directing them, or you might want to have a non-directed conversation. If you do that, always start with something nice. And so what happens? Teacher doesn't believe the first part because they think, well, you just did that to soften me up. And so we've taught people to do that. And so if you're going to change that, you have to reteach people. You have to say, no, I'm just here because I wanted to talk with you about that. The other thing we know is you have to get the other person to talk, and you have to get them to be able to interact with you. I really like how you did a pair share in the middle of your lesson. I thought that was really smart. How'd you feel about it? If the teacher can talk about it, the likelihood of them doing it again actually increases pretty dramatically. You have to keep in mind how lonely it is to be a good teacher. The very best teacher in the country can't go into a staff meeting at the end of the day and say, I was hot damn great today. You should have seen me. Because everyone would say braggart. That same really good teacher can't go home and say anything to their spouse because they get not another school story. And so leaders, and by leaders, I mean everybody in a school, because the truth is anyone in a school is a leader, whether intentionally or not. The kid who's always in trouble is a leader. He's impacting other people. The principal is leading whether or not he is even thinking about it just by his actions. But if a leader in a school can talk with someone else in the school about something they see that is good and get them to talk about it, it begins to change culture. And that's a huge piece in terms of moving anyone's practice forward, whether it's the adult or the kid. That trust is pretty important. Everyone says relationships, that's the most important part. And they're right, as long as we go beyond the relationship. Can you use your good relationship you developed to then leverage what you're there for to improve adult practice so kids will also improve?
So we know that and I'm repeating your words to bring us to the third area I wanted you to talk about. So just in summary, we know that when leaders schedule their time, they increase their effectiveness. We know that when they sit down with a reflective partner who can hold them accountable, that they increase their effectiveness. You also talk a lot about, and this has been so helpful for me, Mark. So thank you for being the one that helped me think through some of these things too. When we train people the way we want to be used, we also increase effectiveness. So talk about that.
Well, the truth is, whether you're thinking about it or not, by every action you do in a school, you're training people to use you the way you'd like. Make sense? My first year of being a principal, I was 28 years old. My superintendent made me wear a three-piece suit so I'd look old enough. I had 800 students in my school. I absolutely loved that school. It was just great. I was on my way to see Shirley Kaltenbach, a fourth grade teacher, who had asked me to come in and see her whole language. It was another version of the whole language phonics wars. We're in another one now. So she asked me to come in at a particular time. I was going to do it. I was all ready to do it. The third week of school, I even made a little sticky note and put it on my desk, 11 o'clock, Shirley. I was on my way to her room, and Tom Aries, the day custodian, came up. Tom spoke 5 languages. English was almost one of them, and he explained that there was a leak in the cafeteria. So what did I do, Will?
I'm going to guess you followed him to see the leak.
I did, because they taught me a whole lot about plumbing in principal school. And so what did I do when I got to the cafeteria? I told him something else he already knew. Yeah, you should fix that. He explained he didn't have the wrench he needed. I told him another thing he already knew. You should call building and grounds. They'll bring out a wrench for you. And you know what I did for the next 30 minutes while the wrench was on its way? I moved a bucket around in a cafeteria catching drips. It wasn't a big enough bucket because the real drip was me. I was just an idiot. And then I compounded the problem by mansplaining it to Shirley in the afternoon recess. Oh, Shirley, I'm so sorry I missed your class. I had to help Tom with. Do you see how I was teaching people to use me? And I'd only been a principal for 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. And Tom, by the way, Tom was 68. I was 28. Tom was on his second career. He worked for the CIA in the Bay of Pigs in Cuba. This guy was much smarter than me. had life experience that was much longer than mine and much fuller. He was a mountain of man. He could speak 5 languages. He would sing opera when he was doing snow removal, and the kids would follow behind him. So what did I do as a principal? I sat down with Tom and said, I need your help. I don't know why. I didn't just say, Tom, you can do this. You know what to do. You don't need me. I've already taught you to come see me. Help me be a better principal. And he did. You know, that school, I think I mentioned before, won 3 national awards in 10 years. It was Tom and other people like Tom that did it, because I didn't think it needed to be me. It needed to be me working with people, not necessarily being the people, if you follow what I'm saying.
Yes.
You know that Tom may have been one of my best teachers in that school. When I had a kid who wasn't doing well, all I had to do is say, Tom, Joey in Mr. Ayers' room, 5th grade, isn't doing well in math. Would you check in with him occasionally? Every day he'd go see him until the kid was doing well. Kids loved this guy. He was a mountain of a man. He could lift anything. And I thoroughly appreciate the fact that Tom made me a better principal. So here's the thing. Every interaction, you're training people to use you the way you like. A principal goes from point A to point B in a school, they're going to get asked 10 things. For me, when I did it, I tried to say yes to everything because I need to take care of my people. So what happened is I had a very fractured, interrupt-driven life. If I said yes to everything, maybe I remembered 6 and did 4. It's not a very high success rate. So a SAM principal, we train to never say no to someone, but never allow the interruption to necessarily redirect you. And so if a principal is going to point A to point B and a teacher comes up and says, can you help me please? The copy machine is out of paper. I know the paper's in the South 40 in the shed. Would you go there with me to get more paper? The SAM principal is trained to say, that's important. We have a first responder who can help you faster because we've thought of this. Eloise at the front office is going to copy that for you using the school office copier, not the one that's not working. And then she'll make sure that we resupply the workroom copier. Would you like help faster? She can help you. So that first responder is simply doing something in lieu of the principal without the principal thinking, yep, I'm going to allow this to pull me away from what I wanted to do. Second example. Teacher comes up to the principal and says, I need just a moment of your time. And the principal really wants to be in Shirley Kaltenbach's classroom. Shirley's waiting. If the principal says, no, I don't have time, what does the teacher hear? I'm not important enough. You cannot explain to someone else why what you are scheduled to do is more important than what they want you to do. So use psychology. You're more important than just a moment of my time. What's it about? Well, I have a student in my class who only speaks Vietnamese. I need some help in teaching this child. A SAM principal would look at that person and say, this is more important than just a conversation in the hallway. See my SAM, push one button on my time track. It'll show all the times I'm available today and the rest of this week. I want at least 30 minutes with you. We need to give this the time it deserves. That sounds simple, but you know how hard it is to not try to explain, but instead just say to the person, yeah, that's important. Hey, the first rule of school leadership, from my perspective, Will, is you always make the other person feel important. Yeah. You make them feel unimportant. If they're a kid, they're going to make you pay. If you're an adult, they're going to make you pay twice. And so instead, recognize your issue is important. But one more interruption, because this is really critical in SAMs. Principal's on the way. Going to go see Shirley's classroom. A teacher comes up, can I have a moment of your time? The principal says, you're more important than a moment. What is it? My wife, I just got a text message. She's on the way to the hospital. She was in a car accident. Can you cover my class? You know what the SAM principal says? Absolutely. Do you need help getting to the hospital? Would you call us when you get there? I don't want you to worry about your class. I'm taking care of that. I got you covered. The only difference is the next day when you had the SAM daily meeting, the SAM would say, did you go to Shirley's room? And you'd say, no, I didn't. And the SAM would say, why? Well, I had to help Joe, whose wife was in the hospital. The SAM would then change it on the time track, showing that's what you did. The SAM would then say, what follow-up do you want with Joe? Do you want to call? Do you want me to schedule 15 minutes so you can call him and find out how he's doing? Then can I go ahead and rearrange that the session you were going to do with Shirley for a little later in the week? The idea here is not to allow your time track or your schedule, your plan to rule you. Hey, every good teacher makes a point, if it's a teachable moment, to take advantage of it, regardless of what their lesson plan says. For a very good principal, we say the same thing. This is your plan. The next day, you'll talk about whether you did it. There are going to be times you shouldn't follow your plan. That makes sense, Phil?
It does. And Mark, what I so appreciate about your lessons and your strategies is that they're always embedded in wisdom. And so thank you, because just those three examples that you gave were such great examples of how you can train others to use you like you want to be used while also training them. But you also gave the example of making sure someone feels like you or senses that you appreciate their time, but the better use of that time would be to schedule a meeting, or in emergencies, giving yourself and other people the grace to step in and cover when things need to happen, knowing that you can still reschedule that based on the priorities that you've created. And so the entire process of time management, the way you teach it, is really based around asking yourself that question, what's the most important thing you want to be doing? Giving yourself permission to connect with someone to help hold you accountable in those priorities, and then training your people. And you masterfully gave an example of 2 or 3 people, but I know from the work I've done with you that this is something you would encourage principals to do with all their people. Look at all of your staff and non-instructional staff and decide in advance of a school year how you want them to be used and how you want them to use you. I know we need to wrap up this conversation, Mark. So I want you to be able to say a couple of things as we close. One, how could people connect with you and your trainings and your processes and your resources? And then 2, what are any parting words of advice that you'd like to leave with leaders?
Well, we're a nonprofit. We work with schools all around the country, and we always follow the same process. No one can make you do this. If a superintendent calls and says, I want this principal to do it, we say no. The principal has to want to do it. So it's always a self-accountability, if you will, not a down above you or above you down kind of accountability. And I think that's pretty important. If you want to do the SAM process, it's easy to get started. And we have information on our website at samprocess.com. You can email me at mark@samsconnect.com. But the first thing you have to decide is, are you willing to change a habit? Because in order to do this, you have to be willing to say, for this to happen, I have to change some of the things I do. A lot of principals will say, I'll just have my instructional coach do the instructional. That's really interesting because the research shows the principal is the one who has the biggest impact, not an instructional coach. A bad principal, meaning a principal who has no background in instruction, still has more impact than a great instructional coach. It's just fascinating. The gravitas a principal has is pretty impressive. So to answer your question, mark@samsconnect.com, or go to the website samprocess.com or samsconnect.com or nationalsams.com. If you ask anybody, another principal, you'll probably find a SAM principal who does this. The National Principal of the Year for secondary schools, she's also from Missouri, by the way, is a SAM principal. The National Superintendent in 2019, a SAM superintendent, does this with his school board. Isn't that interesting? We have districts now that do SAMs in every leadership position, but they still say it's voluntary, you don't have to. But why wouldn't you do something that means that you're going to be more effective? People like you better in the end. Both, we know those 2 things are true. And you know what? SAM practitioners work a shorter workday because we train the SAM to go in, Will, at the time of the day you said you wanted to finish, and say, Will, you had a good day. You did the instructional work you wanted to do. Let me walk you right out of here.
I love it. Mark Shellinger, if there was an educator hall of fame for, because I know we do principals of the year, superintendents of the year, I wish there was an award we could give for most effective coach for principals. You would definitely be on that list, Mark Shellinger. I so appreciate your work. Thank you for what you've done with the SAM process, because it's an investment you've made in educators and in leaders that the outcomes of which are helping students. across this nation. So thank you so much for the great work that you're doing. And Principal Matters listeners, thank you. You can find in the show notes Mark's contact information and a link to their website. And Mark, thanks again. Principal Matters listeners, thank you for doing what matters. We'll talk to you again next week. You can find free resources like this one at williamdparker.com. Subscribe for our free weekly newsletter, which contains bonus material, and also check out the links for Grow Academy's Masterminds, Executive Coaching, and Keynote presentations from my books, as well as from Principal Matters Associates. You can find out more under our speakers tab at williamdparker.com. Thank you for learning together, and thank you for doing what matters.